Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 14th of March 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson, and I'll just point out it is a bit chilly here in Plymouth, so we're both in our woolly pulleys, but I do still have a tie on, so of course I'll be telling the truth. We'll be joined from Holland by Alex Thomson from Eastern Approaches. But before we get into the news and speak to Alex, the weather, blue sky and sunshine, cold in Plymouth, seems to be the case across the country, but of course what's cold in England is being reported as quite warm in Glasgow. So there we are. Alex, have we got you in the lowlands?
Yes, you have, and it's a sunny day here, but pretty chilly as well. And we've had a heavy frost overnight. It should be brightening later.
Okay, hopefully all of those flower bulbs have been planted at the appropriate depth, otherwise they're going to get nipped. Well, on serious matters, we can report that last night at 7 o'clock, a mob of police, that is the description, 7, 8, 9, 10 policemen, we're not quite sure, but a significant number turned up at the house of Guy Taylor to arrest him on a minor public order charge. He was taken to Herefordshire Police Station where he was held overnight, and we understand that he's en route to Aberystwyth Court to face those charges of minor public order, whatever that is, a minor public order offence. We believe this relates to an incident that took place at Welshpool Magistrates Court either at the end of last year or early this year. That incident was apparently just an exchange of words with a local solicitor. However, later that produced a phone call from the police to say that they were arresting Guy Taylor by telephone because apparently the police in Welshpool didn't have enough transport to actually get to Hereford to arrest him. That was several months ago, but for some reason, 7 o'clock last night, the police were there mob-handed in order to arrest him. This is the full details of the Magistrates Court. We're not sure of the time of the hearing, but if there's anybody in the local area that could turn up to give support and of course be there to see justice being done, I'm sure that Guy and his wife Linda would greatly appreciate it. Now we're just on the subject of courts, just remind people of this one. Last week we were reporting on Judge Mumby. He's back in the press again, and it's quite remarkable that the head of the Family Law Division is now saying, well, we need to move on with reforms of the family courts, and the best way to do that is to remove the paper, remove the evidence really, and digitise everything. So the comment in the paper was, this is Peter Hitchens, for thousands of parents the most terrifying aspect of falling into the clutches of our child protection system is how they find themselves plunged into an inhuman underworld. Well, we couldn't agree more. We've been in court, we've seen the lies and perjury, but how remarkable that it was Judge Mumby himself who was saying in 2014, what I spotted constantly, and I'm not a psychiatrist and not a psychologist, my perception was that the parents, both parents, had been completely disempowered by the court process. And of course, if you remove paper, you remove proper evidence from a court and replace it with electronic information, you're completing it, aren't you, Mike?
So we're child stealing by Skype now?
Child stealing by Skype and email. Well, if you're new to the UK Column News and you think that we're being a little bit hard in those comments, we'd encourage you to have a listen to this extraordinary interview which took place on Saturday night. It was run by Freedom Talk Radio Scotland, and a lady called Carol Woods came on air to give her testimony as to what had happened when she started to report wrongdoing in Lancashire Social Services, an incident which then involved the eviction of very vulnerable young people from care homes and the unlawful taking of large amounts of property. Alex, I believe you were able to listen into that broadcast. It was remarkable, wasn't it?
It was a staggering interview, Brian, even by the standards of Blog Talk Radio, which often comes up with some good stuff. And for anyone who's searching for it, if they don't want to type the URL in, you just go to a search engine and type in Blog Talk Radio Carol Woods. Carol stresses that she's without the letter E on the end. In fact, someone has invented an alternative persona for her that does have an E on the end of Carol. That's a separate matter. Carol Woods, Blog Talk Radio, Brian Gerrish, that will bring it up. And bear in mind that there's 2 Blog Talk Radio interviews. This one was preceded by one a fortnight earlier in late February, which is very good background, but doesn't have Carol herself in it. She had just been released from secure mental unit at the time. She goes into great detail, particularly 1 hour, 28 minutes, when Brian says to her, please give us the litany of police persecution of you and death threats made against you. And she does. She opens her mouth and says, in 2004, so-and-so. In 2005, so-and-so. In 2006, so-and-so. She details, as she has done in previous YouTube clips when she was in the secure mental unit last month, she details Lancashire police. We don't even know if they really are police, that's another matter, but they were working for the police, and they were masquerading as prison psychologists and psychiatrists, masquerading as her in court, all over the north of England, from the northeast down to the Midlands. Incredible stuff. So listen, and if you're going to type in the URL directly, notice that the corruption, the last word of that URL, is deliberate. Is actually a typo. It is with a single R. So the version that was shown on the screen is the version to type in. Now, I shall be writing to Lancashire Chief Constable, as Brian suggested that we should, because I'm an alumnus of his college at Cambridge, and as a former GCHQ officer, I can point out to him that I was delighted to serve chief constables with intelligence in my day. So I'm not anti-police by any stretch of the imagination. But as Brian said in the interview, he is the man personally responsible, now that this lady has given us a decade's worth of detailed death threats by Lancashire police officers and other forces. He is the man who will be personally accountable if anything happens to her. And we need to be writing to him politely and firmly to point that out to him.
Alex, thank you very much for that. Well, if our police are not doing their jobs, there we are. If the police are not doing their jobs, then of course we can rely on the church. And I'd just like to remind people that the Right Reverend Timothy Stevens has put up a staunch defence for the good works of Common Purpose. If you have a look on the Common Purpose website, and he alludes to some nasty people in the southwest of England. Don't know who those could be, Mike.
Can't imagine.
But apparently wild theories about Common Purpose. Well, somebody kindly sent us this, which has come from Barnsley. It's a very good little article talking about Common Purpose and the Fabian connection. So we are not alone in pointing a finger at this pernicious political charity and the dangers it presents, not only to adults, but of course school children. And we felt it was important to highlight this Fabian connection because we were kindly provided with some briefing documents. I assure our listeners today, this is one of a group of 3 briefing documents provided to Labour in order for Labour to map out their defence policy. So here we are, the Fabian Society, outward to the world, and they are working alongside a German organisation, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. And if you have a look at them, well, they're just an organisation working for peace in Europe. Well, of course, they're so interested in peace in Europe that they are now buried into the political system in Westminster. And here is one of their key works, which is From Hybrid Peace to Human Security, the Berlin Report. And this is clearly saying that the only way forward for Britain is within the EU. It's the only safe place for the defence policy. And if you follow this little German organisation through, it boasts that it was started off work between Tony Blair and Mr. Schroeder. You come across this, Building the Good Society, the project to the Democratic left, and we've got John Cruddas MP working alongside a German lady, and they are building the good society. And if you have a look at what they're talking about, it's we've got it all wrong. We haven't been able to drive forward and to adopt to the corporatist agenda. If you have a look at the section in green, but it's also a moment full of opportunities and promise to revitalise our common purpose and fulfil the European dream of freedom and equality. So there we are, lots of freedom in France at the moment and the rest of Europe, and the Germans have only got our best interests at heart, apparently, Alex.
Well, I would just take issue with one little word in what you just said, Brian, when you called the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, the Labour Party's partner here, when you call that a little organisation, it's a pretty whopping one. It's the think tank attached to the SPD, the German Socialist Party. And all three German parties have got think tanks named after what the Germans think of as the great and good, very dodgy figures. Friedrich Ebert was the post-First World War Chancellor in the Weimar Republic, plenty of dirt on him. And the German equivalent of the Lib Dems, the FDP, Freie Demokratische Partei, named its think tank after Naumann, Friedrich Naumann, who was the man who invented the idea of Lebensraum and the idea that Germany should conquer the whole of Mitteleuropa. In fact, he coined the term Mitteleuropa in a book he wrote. So very dodgy stuff. And of course, the conservatives, who I'm about to demonstrate are collapsing in Germany, named their think tank after Konrad Adenauer, who confided in Harry Becker after the war, "Don't you know I have 150 ex-Nazis only in my personal chancellery? Ha ha ha." So those are the think tanks of Germany. Yeah. Yes, thanks for the quick shot of you having a chuckle. That's the best way to respond to these chaps. Right then, on to the German elections. Now, the Germans hold their elections on Sundays. They're trying to foist that on us at the moment, but we won't go that way. We're a Christian country. And they have had 3 of the 16 federal states of Germany, the Bundesländer, had their turn to elect their Landtag, their regional parliament. Now, these regional parliaments, Landtag, have more power even than the Scottish Parliament in the German system. They're completely in control of education, for example, and even some security matters. And the 3 figures show a quite good spread of what's going on across Germany. The 3 states are the southwestern state of Baden-Württemberg, the midwestern state of Rhineland-Pfalz, and the former East German state of Sachsen-Anhalt. Now, if we go here to the first one, this is Rhineland-Pfalz, and it shows that the Green Party have actually come into the lead. But look at this blue pillar here, AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, the anti-EU party, always touted as an extreme party, but it's just a moderate anti-EU party. Out of nowhere, they've got 15% of the votes. And next slide, please. You can see the swing here. Okay, so this is the Midwestern well-to-do farming state. Always used to vote CDU, Christian Democratic, and it might look very somber, but the black colour is actually the equivalent of the Conservatives. Very few parties in the world have black as their colour. It shows something about the party. They're what they call the moderate social centre-right Christian Democrats. They've collapsed, and the Prime Minister of that state of Germany is a lady who was thought to be Merkel's successor, and she's lost the state to these anti-EU people. No one thought that would ever have happened, but it has. Now, in the other 2 Bundesländer, just more quickly to show you what's going on there, this is Baden-Württemberg, I believe. In fact, I think I've got, the order might be wrong, but no, this is this is Sachsen-Anhalt in eastern Germany, and this is a poorer part of eastern Germany, and you can see that although the socialists are still in the lead, Alternative für Deutschland has come out of nowhere to a very strong showing of 12.6%, and the next slide is the swing. Notice, by the way, that the turnout, that's Wahlbeteiligung on the previous slide, was 70%. That's how much swing there has been, and people have got very disillusioned with the Greens. And then the final of the 3 Bundesländer is, I believe, that is Baden-Württemberg, and you can see that the Christian Democrats are in the lead, but they have actually ceded second place to Alternative für Deutschland, to 24.2%, and this is a very well-stated Germany that isn't directly threatened by mass migration and other EU problems. So very, very substantial changes. The German press overnight have been calling this a landslide, an earthquake, a resounding message to Merkel that her policies are not welcome. Look at that swing to the anti-EU party there, 24.2%, a quarter of the population swung to them, compared with 5 years ago. And then I think we have one map. There we are. This is Sachsen-Anhalt, the poor eastern states. I've been there quite a lot, post-industrial wasteland of kind of Lutheran roots. And you can see that the whole of the south of that state has en masse decided, district by district, to vote for an anti-EU party. So that is staggering stuff for Germany. And I think if we have a link here to a video which people can watch if they want to look it up, if you search for that headline there, Rumswahlen, Das ist der Moment, in dem sich Deutschland drastisch verändert. That's from a site called Focus. It's talking about the moment when Germany drastically changed. And if you watch that 1-minute video, you will see incredibly emotive faces of the AFD politicians realizing that the people are turning to them and against the EU. And in fact, the scunnered faces, to use that good old Scots word again, of the Conservatives and Merkel's party as they realized that Germans have finally had the courage to vote against an establishment party.
Sorry, Alex, you said that this was significant, at least more significant than local elections would be here. What is the significance? How do we sort of put this into context?
Well, it yields a crop of politicians who, because they lead the regional parliament, the federal state parliament in their own area, they then become contenders for power in Berlin. And if they lose their vote such as this lady in Rhineland-Pfalz, who was being positioned to be Merkel's successor, then they don't have a leg to stand on. And besides, in some of the federal states within Germany, that is where immigration policy is decided, because these guys have got their own budgets at state level. They've got their own education policies. They run their own schools. Berlin really can't tell them what to do in very many areas, except sending in the troops. That's the only power that's reserved to the centre and foreign policy. It's a highly decentralised state. And so if 2 or 3 of the most populous regions of Germany vote the CDU out and vote Alternative for Deutschland into second place, then you're going to have representation of AfD at state level and eventually nationally. But to avoid that, the old rivals, really, the faux conservatives, the faux socialists, and the faux Greens, who are supposedly at opposite ends of the scale to each other, have decided to hold their nose and join coalitions that they're negotiating on that today to keep AfD out of power. And they have the gall to call this a coalition for Germany.
Alex, has British mainstream media reported any of these events in Germany and the swing to anti-EU parties?
I've seen very little indeed overnight, even in the broadsheet papers, let alone the BBC. I can guarantee you now, if the BBC covers it, they will dismissively call them regional elections or even local elections, far downplaying their significance. It's the equivalent of votes to the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish parliaments and assemblies.
Right, okay, thank you for that.
Okay, let's move on. I thought this was a particularly interesting article. Alex, I'm going to ask you for comment in a minute. Polish minister says foul play behind president's jet crash. And of course, this was the crash of the Polish jet at Smolensk as they were heading off to commemorate the Katyn massacre, Second World War massacre of the Polish army by Russia. So they were going to commemorate that. This aircraft crashed as it approached for landing. And of course, there have been all kinds of rumours ever since. The Polish defence minister here is blaming Russia for it. He didn't name Russia specifically, but everybody understood that's what he meant. He said, I don't want to rule on whether political enemies of the current Russian authorities who accuse Russia of reaching the highest positions by using armed terror against their own population are right. Perhaps it's not true, he said, but there's no doubt that the Russian attack on Georgia, and why he's bringing Georgia, he's talking about the South Ossetian conflict, why he's talking about that in the context of this, I've no idea, but he said there's no doubt that the Russian attack on Georgia was one of the first, preceded by internal sabotage inside of Georgia. There's no doubt that what happened over Smolensk was aimed at depriving Poland of the leadership who led our nation towards independence. And he said, after the Smolensk plane crash, we can say that we were the first great victims of terrorism in the modern conflict that's playing out right before our eyes. Now, of course, this has to be seen in the context of the fact that Poland continues to sidle up to NATO and is encouraging more NATO infrastructure right up against the Russian border. But the plane crash itself, well, I took a personal interest in that, Brian, because I knew somebody on the plane. But the fact is that the most likely explanation, if you actually listen to the cockpit voice recording and so on, it's absolutely clear that there was some pressure put on the pilots to land, despite the circumstances, the weather circumstances. There are other questions to be answered, but there's no evidence that it was actually Russia involved in, and in fact that would be an act of war. I don't believe it was Russia. Have you any thoughts on this, Alex?
I'm glad you brought up those recordings, Mike. That's the main point I would have made anyway. You can actually hear the pilots being hassled because they don't trust Russian air traffic control. So as soon as they cross the border into Russian airspace, the order comes, presumably from President Kaczynski, who was on the plane. I don't care about the damn weather, just land the thing. And so they clip the tops of the trees in this heavy fog. And then, of course, it was never reported on Polish TV, as far as I know, but President Putin actually took the surviving prime minister, who hadn't been on the plane, to the site, and the prime minister broke down in tears, and Putin gave him a supportive hug. It all looked very genuine to me. I don't think the Russians would have stood anything to gain from that. And the comparison with South Ossetia is ridiculous. The banditry that went on in South Ossetia was notoriously hard to fathom before 2008. World experts were saying they didn't know who was belonging to which group and who was backed by whom. And for the Poles, with their, I have to say, customary, almost bordering on arrogant certainty, saying, no, this is, at least the political class of Poland, saying, no, this was Russian meddling. Well, nobody in the Caucasus, not even President Saakashvili, was saying Russia is behind these groups. You just can't say such categorical things. And I mean, the Russian attack on Georgia, what a language to use. It was Saakashvili and the defense minister at the time, Kezarashvili, who sent tank rounds into civilians in South Ossetia. That's how the war started.
Absolutely, but of course, a lot of this anti-Russian rhetoric coming from the Kaczynski faction within Poland.
Yes, I don't claim to be an expert on Polish politics, but I think I've mentioned once before that Poland is the kind of place where, when I was there on a visit, a gentleman just came up to me, assuming I was a local, and said, "What do you think about these election results? I'm so glad that the country is safe." So people care deeply about politics, but it's riven with deep divisions. And if you're between Germany and Russia, the world looks very different than if you're between the Atlantic Ocean and the North Sea. So we have to bear in mind they have to deal with these massive expansionist states in their midst. But there is a lot of infighting. I mean, even if you look at the history of Poland between the wars, we tend to think of it as poor old Poland picked on by the Nazis, but they got a lot of very bullying stuff towards their own neighbours in the interwar period. And you should always take with a pinch of salt what the Poles say.
Absolutely, and that brings us on to Ukraine. You wanted to highlight this article from Defence One. The world's first cyber caused electricity blackout, shook security experts around the globe. Here's what it means for keeping the lights on.
Yes, because the article claims that it couldn't happen here, by which they mean the United States, but it could equally be that Britain would have the same kind of false sense of security. We could never be hacked by this allegedly Russian bug. Well, I'm sorry, we could. And not just Russia, but even smaller states have access to electromagnetic pulse technology and could easily let just one weapon off over Britain, or I think about even just one over the middle of the continental United States is predicted to be enough to knock out the whole electricity grid without even the need for viruses in the power generation software. So we're extremely vulnerable to what happened in Ukraine. And people think, oh, well, a winter without electricity, that's not fun. You can survive it. Well, Ukraine and Georgia and places I've spent a considerable time, you can't. People freeze to death. And I don't just mean the drunks out in the doorways. People in their own flats will freeze to death if they don't have electricity. And there's parts of the UK, certainly Scotland, where that applies. And if you think, well, we get through a British winter, say in the south of England or whatever, just bear in mind that we always have central heating these days. And if you travel around the east of the continent of Europe and find buildings where people are shivering under 3 layers of clothes because they haven't got central heating on, that's when you realise, I think, what it means to keep the power on during the winter. And Mike's always drawn attention to the fact that we're knocking out, I think, as much generating capacity as we can. So even if we don't get attacked by an enemy, we're going to have a shortfall in our generating capacity pretty soon.
The NSA and GCHQ perhaps as well, maybe you can comment on this, of course, are suggesting that they need extra powers because of the risk of cyber attack of some kind. And I think if you look back at the attacks in Iran, for example, these were cyber-based attacks on Iran's nuclear generating capacity and whatnot. What do you see as the risk of that as we move through the next few years? Is the NSA's allegation that they need extra powers because this is such a danger? Is it a genuine thing in your opinion?
Well, it's not something I ever heard NSA saying when I was working for GCHQ. there seems to have been a massive expansion in the last few years since I emigrated and stopped working for GCHQ in NSA's physical hardware. And this site in Utah, which not one I'd ever heard of when I was working in close connection with them, they seem to, yes, indeed, be claiming that they need huge numbers of megawatts of extra electricity for these coolers, for these supercomputers. But I don't know. I'm not an expert on the electricity of it, but it seems that those shouting loudest for it are not the technical experts at the middle of it. They seem to be the congressmen and lobbyists who are connected with the expansion of the NSA.
Yes, indeed. Well, let's talk about the expansion of investigatory powers and data retention in this country then. Last couple of days ago, the Data Biometrics Commissioner released his December 2015 report. It was only made public a couple of days ago, and this is Alistair McGregor QC. He's, just to give a bit of background on this, because many people maybe don't know who the Commissioner for the Retention and Use of Biometric Material is, but it says that the role of the Commissioner for the Retention and Use of Biometric Material was established by the Protection of Freedoms Act 2012. The Act also established a new regime to govern the retention and use by the police in England and Wales of DNA samples, DNA profiles and fingerprints. And one of his responsibilities, Biometrics Commissioner, is in essence to provide independent oversight, apparently, of that new regime. So this is his report, his latest report, 119 pages of it. And he says it seems likely that a significant number of biometric records have been or will have to be deleted, even though there may well have been good reasons for keeping them on national security grounds. Well, we'll see about that. Basically, what he's saying is that 7,800 people are having their data held on police databases as of October 2015. Only about 55% of those people have been charged or convicted of any, quotes, recordable offence. Of course, the guidelines, and note that it does say guidelines, whether those guidelines have any statutory backing or not, I'm not sure. But the guidelines say that, of course, the police are supposed to delete those or destroy them, those records, if there's no charge or conviction of a recordable offence. So he's saying that the UK's counter-terror databases have evolved without there being in place the sort of comprehensive and clearly documented governance arrangements, policies and protocols that one might reasonably expect, which is probably why one issue that the Investigatory Powers Bill is wanting to address, because what it seems to be going on with this legislation is that they are attempting to sort of regularise activities that have been going on for quite some time outside the law. So this report here from Computer Weekly saying that 1 in 10 UK citizens believe that Theresa May has done enough to explain the Investigatory Powers Bill. So that means 90% of people don't really have a clue what this is about, and they don't think that Theresa May has done what's necessary to help them understand it. They say that the report here says that 1 in 5 believe the introduction of the bill is justified. So most people don't, therefore. And it's interesting that the Labour Party is threatening to hold up the bill's progress because of privacy concerns. Andy Burnham has said that that Britain needs a new legal framework in this crucial area that is fit for the digital age, balancing powers, blah-de-blah-de-blah. I'm not going to go on through that, but he says that while he shares Theresa May's wish to see a comprehensive bill on the statute book by the end of the year, they can't let the timetable dictate the quality. And he's basically saying that they will delay it if possible. Well, it is in the Commons tomorrow for its second reading. So let's just have a little bit more look at this. The UK Surveillance Powers Bill could force startups, they're talking about technology startups, new companies, to bake in backdoors. And this is continuing discussion over which was really sparked by Apple and their fight with the FBI. And what this article is saying is, while the Apple versus FBI court battle has drawn all eyes to the question of what would be considered reasonable assistance for companies to provide law enforcement agencies over in the UK, the government is attempting to enshrine in law surveillance capabilities that would enable state agencies to compel even very small startups to bake insecurities into their systems in order to be able to hack users on demand. And what they're saying is not only are they attempting to force companies that have greater than 10,000, a user base which is greater than 10,000 people, customers, to create these backdoors, but they're saying that they would make it illegal for any of these companies to announce publicly that this was what had happened. So that's a pretty dangerous scenario, that a company not only is required by legislation to install a backdoor into what may be sensitive material that they're carrying on behalf of their customers, but they're not allowed to tell their customers that this is the case. What do you think?
Well, I think it's very serious, Mike, and I'll just bring this on screen. It'd be difficult to see, but we received a copy of how you can help to keep our community safe from terrorist threat. This has come from the Safer Devon Partnership. They're working together to prevent people from being drawn into terrorism. It says that anybody who's got an extremist view is of interest, and what you should do is report them, because if you report them, you can help them. So here, under the prevent strategy, we have a pernicious little leaflet which is encouraging people to spy on each other, and it says extremism isn't illegal, but you can help these people by reporting them. I think it's dangerous stuff. This is a police state very close to completion, not in the early stages, Mike.
Have you any closing thoughts, Alex?
Regarding the first thing you mentioned there about biometric data, don't believe anything about the deletion of biometric data. I know from recent translation work that the standard now in Western countries, when they put out to tender the requirement for DNA testing kits, is that the companies, to get a successful tender, must be able to demonstrate that a complete profile for a person can be built up from 50 picograms of data, of DNA. So that's like a skin flake or something less. You can always build up a national DNA database again if you have the legal ability to do so, never mind whether you destroy the existing samples.
Okay, right, let's move on. Tonight, 2 live programs, Humanity versus Insanity and Fracking Nightmare, beginning at 7:30 as usual. What was Ian talking about?
He's going to be talking about what's happening north of the border. He's also going to be talking on Fracking Nightmare about the anniversary, unfortunate death of a campaigner in Australia.
So Mel Kelly joining him for Humanity, and that's about the SNP?
Yes, how there's a close down north of the border. Okay, well, just following on from surveillance, and we'll just leave people to make up their own mind about this. This is a picture of Mr. Sheriff, who's David Cameron's dementia guru. He's there briefing a very interesting team of people about dementia, lots of gold braid from the Royal Navy, and it links into this. We've got Plymouth University, opinion dementia, a growing problem with growing solutions. But if you read what they're saying underneath, it says that dementia supporters in Scotland who are members of the Rural Demential Task and Finish group have been lobbying for people with dementia to use an innovative GPS-based device to track them. So we're going to have people tracked, but the claim from Plymouth University is that this is going to be to help them. And I pause there because what do you say about this? David Cameron forecasting 2 million people by 2050, and nobody's really talking about the causes.
Indeed. Alex, EU referendum. So Barack Obama getting involved in this discussion, it seems.
He is. Just to wrap up on Poland, by the way, we have in the chat room a gentleman called Benny, whose parents fled from Poland to Germany when he was a small boy because they knew that the Polish state was spying on everyone and opening their letters and listening to their phone calls. And he's been in Britain for 4 years and he's now a UK column viewer. So that shows you something about our viewership and listenership. Welcome, Benny. And he says, now it's all happening here in Britain and most people have their heads up their backsides. So there you are, take it from someone who knows. Now, as regards Barack Obama, here he is. He'd been trailed for a while by the State Department and other senators as saying he wanted to get involved in Britain's discussion. And here he is showing what he thinks of the special relationship with Britain, really, ordering us to remain in Britain, in the EU. Do you have the quote on screen as well, I think? There we are, thank you, yes. Steve Baker, a Conservative MP, said, and there's a nice colourful quote by him in there, says, whenever a US president intervenes in our constitutional future, I always reread the US Declaration of Independence. And then his quote is, I will take lessons from the US president, this is about EU membership, when the US accepts, and this is a fictional argument about the equivalent of EU in North America, when the US accepts a Supreme Court over its own and free movement from Canada to Central America. So God bless America. I think he said Aaron Johnson has written in the Telegraph that's telling about the hypocrisy of this. But as Obama limps lamely off the world stage, we see his true intent and attitudes coming out. So if we go on to the next one, we have the Obama doctrine, a kind of end of presidency candid long article by Jeffrey Goldberg writing for The Atlantic. And you remember all the panic during Brown and, well, it was Obama's time still already, but when Brown was Prime Minister, that the special relationship was on the wane because of these silly gifts that they were giving each other. Well, here is the current journalist, Goldberg, writing about what Obama has told him face to face. Here it is on screen. Not long ago, I asked Obama to describe his thinking on that day, being the day that the US decided not to attack Syria a couple of years ago, 2013. He listed the practical worries that have occupied him, blah, 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 blah. A second major factor, said Obama directly to the journalist, was the failure of Cameron. Prime Minister Cameron or David Cameron. The failure of Cameron to obtain the consent of his parliament. There you are. The House of Commons is not the mother of parliaments, and the senior partner to the United States Congress in the progress of world democracy and common law. No, it's Cameron's parliament, and Cameron failed. So that's what Obama really thinks of us. And then on the second slide, we have more here. I'll speed up a bit here. He actually mentions to Goldberg, the journalist, if I'm reading this rightly, he said, Obama said to the journalist, the Brits think they have a special relationship with the United States. Huh, well, I told this Cameron, you have to pay your fair share or you can forget about the special relationship. And Goldberg couples this to remarks that Obama made a diagrams to him about free riders that aggravate me. Well, okay, Brian would be the first to accept we are free riders in that we're not spending on defence and letting the US do it for us. But even so, that shows you that the pits of the special relationship at the moment. And as presidents shuffle off the stage, they tend to tell more of the truth than when they've been in office. Then we go on to Iceland. This one from the Telegraph Business, a Brexit paradise, how Iceland's project fear backfired. And here we can see that the Icelanders are being very honest to us. In the middle of the article, we see that the Icelanders have done exactly what UK column covered the Swiss doing a couple of weeks ago, which is that having had an application for EU membership in the system for years, the Copenhagen process, I believe it's called, they suddenly withdrew it. So their diplomats have actually thought this is important enough to tell Brussels, sorry, scrap that. We're not really interested in that. So complete turnaround since 2008. And by the same journalist in the Telegraph, Britain warned it wields no power in German-dominated EU. And again, the Icelanders are very honest people. They're not afraid of anyone. And here we are. Mr. Gunnlaugsson, well, he's not really a surname in Iceland, but never mind. You're supposed to use people's first names, but there we are. Mr. Gunnlaugsson, for the purposes of the Telegraph, says, when it comes to the big stuff, the decisions are made by two and increasingly one country, France and Germany, and then increasingly just Germany. Others are called to meetings. The Icelanders have been observing this in Brussels from outside. Others are called to meetings to approve of what has been decided, if not in the afternoon, then during the middle of the night. Now, the last time that people were summoned by Germans in the middle of the night to tell them how that the future of their country was going to be was 1938, 39, 40. And he says this seems to have become the standard way of doing things in Brussels. So while we have the Norwegians and other, shall we say, bootlickers of the EU telling us that everything will be fine, we must stay in and there's no future outside, the Icelanders, who are very proud, independent Norse types, are saying, don't kid yourself. Not even Britain, as the second biggest economy, has any say in the EU. It's all German. Then we move on to Daniel Hannan. Now, a lot of people can't believe why he's still in the Conservative Party, but he is a very good MEP. And here we have on his own site his argument that Britain's obsolescent conglomerates are backing Remain. He's talking about the divide between small and medium-sized enterprises and the huge corporates who are not even British companies, they're global now. And freeze that screen as we don't have time to read through it all. But here he is talking about the divergence between real British business, as in family and small business, versus corporates who are masquerading as British companies. That's well worth reading if you've watched that screen. And then finally, in this section, Peter Hitchens, a man who one has to admire more and more as he tells more of the truth, is telling this excellent recent website, Conservative Woman. It really is a proper social conservative website. What he thinks of the country, and this screen, which you can freeze, says that he can see no limit to how wicked the state can become because it cannot substitute for morality. The more it tries to do so, the more it will fail. Absolutely correct. And then the second quote in there is, how will this look for his grandchildren? And he says, emigrate. Now, he says it to people in my age group too, in their 30s. And admittedly, I did emigrate age 30, but I can say hand on heart, I did it simply for the purposes of marriage. And otherwise, I would have stuck in the country. And if you're not being persecuted, and even if you are, dear old Carol Wood isn't trying to emigrate, so you haven't got an excuse, please stay in the country and turn things around. Don't emigrate, because then Britain has got no chance at all.
Well, indeed, that attitude is quite similar to people who are working within institutions that are retiring early and getting out of the system rather than trying to sort it out. So we've got to stand, I think, and stay and fight rather than leave at this point.
I'm sure you didn't mean fight, Mike. I'd have to make a phone call after the programme to the local South Devon Partnership.
Indeed.
The country is in a perilous state. What's causing it? Well, of course, it's our own politicians. Whether they're being controlled or not, it's the politicians calling the shots. So here's just a few slides to remind us of the quality of our politicians. So David Cameron blatantly privatising the NHS. How do you do that? You do it by collapsing the existing NHS. And apart from common purpose within the management structure, he's been withdrawing funding consistently. So the Mirror here reporting that ultimately there's going to be about 93 billion taken out of the NHS, and the result is it's going to collapse. But there's no money for NHS, but there's unlimited money for weapons and overseas wars, and of course state spying, as Mike's just indicated. And of course corrupt councils fully supported by the government. Here's Perth and Kinross Council, David Scott's local council. Here's their accounts, and if we have a look, huge reserves, 373 million. So on one hand, the public are being told there's no money for anything, potholes in the roads, care of the elderly, but what we see is increasingly corrupt councils storing public money. And then we get to this sort of thing, the Mirror here with this, it's a horrible story, but a lady who's dying, she's already had a lung transplant, but that's not working, so she's terminally ill. She decides to get married, and when she comes back, there's a letter on her doorstep to say that her allowances have been cut by DWP. Well, of course, it isn't the Department of Work and Pensions, it's a man who has actually carried out this vile deed, and here is Ian Duncan Smith. And let's remember, he is also a change agent. He is destroying the benefit system so that the new regime can come in. And here's another one. We've said low empathy, Owen Paterson MP, because this is the man who thinks that pensioners should be put to work picking fruit, paid below the minimum wage, because that'll keep those nasty people from Eastern Europe out. That's sarcasm, because the UK column says that people coming to this country are being viciously used by this low empathy government. Dangerous, callous, arrogant, ignorant, indifferent. Should these people be in office? Well, of course they shouldn't. And that probably brings us nicely to this man. Somebody has put up £430,000 to hear this man's life story. Well, I won't be buying it, and I would hope most of the public won't bother either. But in this Mail article are these two. This is the picture, and the caption from the Mail is meet the two top contenders for Britain's next Prime Minister. Anybody wonder what the problem is? And on that rather sad but reflecting note, a throne in Brussels. You've got a few seconds, Alex.
Simply to say, I've played this before, but if you're wondering why Belgium is such a mess, and if you would like to know more about the black sheep of our royal family, then it's the cousins. They're also Coburg monarchs, like our royals are. and they reside in Brussels. And this Flemish writer has given a superb version in English, A Throne in Brussels, of their history since 1830, when none other than Britain decided to create a country for them and put them on the throne. It explains why my Belgian friends and colleague, when I was walking through right outside the palace last Friday, when I pointed to the flag and said, "Hey, look, they're flying the national flag. Why don't you have a royal standard?" Why he said, "I couldn't give a stuff about our royal family." If you want to find out why the Belgians think like that about their royal family, read that book. It's relevant to the whole of Europe.
Thank you, Alex, and I note the common purpose colours on the front. Well, that brings us to the end of today's news. A lot of information. Don't just sit there feeling sad and depressed. We need people to get out there doing things. And of course, if you can help Guy Taylor today or help another individual, supporting one another, key part of the agenda. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Whew, that was quite a pace, but we got through it.